Okay, we are about to discuss an amazing French composer. I am with the pianist Beau Tees. We are in Iowa. I got it right.
Yep.
Yes, Iowa City, Iowa, no
Yes.
less. University of Iowa. I'm trying to get Iowa in my brain for all of you who wonder why I'm emphasizing this, but seriously, Beau Tees has just released in 2018 an incredible two CD set, the complete piano music of French composer Gabriel Dupont, 1878, 1914, and I do these dates because they're very, very important to understand where a composer was, where he was coming from, he, she, and how it all fell together. And also very important, this Dupont was was from Normandy,
Hmm.
Normandian, if that's right. And there's something very special in France about Normandy,
Mm.
very special, and other things. This is an MSR Classics, I guess 2017 release. I just saw 2017. It's 2018, I think. Yeah.
2018,
Yeah.
yeah.
Okay. Sorry,
Hmm.
my secretary. I'm going to have to discipline her. He, she, it. Um, and on this, in regards to this composer, this is what's so fascinating about Gabriel Dupont that we spoke about a little bit off camera, and you're gonna tell us how this
Hmm.
works because I still can't quite figure it out, but there's something that has me very, very excited. This is a man who's really like Proust, if you will, bedridden or not sociable, shall we at least say, or Schubert in the terms of contracting a disease that takes a while to kill, if you will,
Hmm.
and reflecting and writing music about it. But there's to make a long story short, Gabriel Dupont suffered from tuberculosis from
Hmm.
roughly about 1904 until his death in 1914. He was 38, I think, 36,
36.
36
Yep.
years old. The whole tragedy, Gershwin didn't suffer, but dying too young, brilliant composers. But in this case, as I said, like Proust and Schubert, those are my offhand comparisons. This man knew and understood that he was in trouble with this disease,
Mm. Hmm.
and yet there is something very special. Like call it optimism, which is too naive a word, but there's something very, very transcendent in the most beautiful way about this man's music. Gorgeous, gorgeous, gorgeous pianists, professionals, and even college students. It's wonderful music on this two CD disc, but this man was really essentially kind of lost to history because of the cavalcade of events. We're going to talk about that overtook 1914. Everybody, I hope you are still reading history. 1914, the beginning of World War One, and the year of Gabriel Dupont's death. He just kind of got lost in the tidal wave. But the people he studied with speak to whatever the specialness is about his music. Chambry Vidor, the Tierney, was it? The other great organist and composer, Vierne, I think. Yeah, sorry.
Viren, yeah.
Yeah, Vierne. Sorry. Okay, Beau, tell me. Let's get started. Um, let's talk about this journey you've had in music. It sounds kind of like mine. Uh, I really, I've always loved classical music, but when I was a kid, I took every opportunity to avoid piano lessons.
Mm.
The minute my parents moved from Spokane to Santa Barbara, that was it. Uh, and then something kind of hit me. I know what it is. I'm going to be interviewed about it in a couple of days. When I was in about ninth grade, but all of a sudden, slam, that's it, music. Tell me your
Mm.
story.
Yeah. So I grew up. I was taking piano lessons from a very young age, and I always loved it.
Oh,
And
hell.
I was only 6 years old when I first started, and then I grew up in such a small town. I got to eighth grade and had advanced so quickly that my teacher said, "I can't teach you anymore.
Wow.
I don't." And so I never thought I was going to do anything with music, so I just stopped taking piano lessons. I played for my own enjoyment, and then senior year of high school, I thought, maybe I do want to do this music thing. So kind of just threw together an audition, just practicing by myself. And really in college is when I first started getting into classical music. And then I had such a great teacher, and I was just hooked. hooked from the very beginning of working with her.
What was the music before your discovery of classical music? Were you just noodling around, improvising, or what?
It was mostly just method books and maybe some movie themes. It was a little bit of classical here and there, but I never
Amazing.
approached any like early advanced music or anything like that.
Wow,
Um,
interesting. It
yeah.
amazes me about you younger folks, frankly, because of course again I was obsessed with classical music, but Prokofiev piano sonatas, eighth grade, not
Mm,
playing them, but listening to them.
mm,
By the way,
yeah.
our stories diverge pretty significantly because I was a lousy pianist, always have been. So now the other thing that fascinates me about it, and I don't mean to, is not meant to be condescending in any way. You got your BA, your MA, your DMA, all. And by the way, your DMA in 2018, which as I told you off air was like yesterday. Um,
Yeah.
and all in within a sort of zone in Iowa in the Midwest. Am I correct here? Yeah, you mentioned Minnesota before we started,
Hmm.
but you are a Midwestern boy, even a
Oh
small
yeah.
town Midwestern boy, and you mentioned that Iowa City seems kind of even now still like a big city. Yeah, something? What?
Yeah, yeah. So I mean, I love the Midwest. The people are always super nice, and there's wide open spaces. It's just great. And then you get these little pockets of cities, which is nice. And
Yeah.
so yeah, I did my undergrad in Minnesota, and I did the MA and DMA both at Iowa. So I've been in Iowa City for about 10 years now.
Now
And it's just,
let me
oh, go
ask,
ahead.
because of course you have your DMA, and but let's be clear, you're it's time to get some work. But the point is, are you willing to move, or are you really? Is there something about your character and your need to be there? And by the way, I would salute that over taking a job in Edmonton, for
I mean,
beginning with.
I'm open to
Of
either
course,
staying or open to moving. I
of
love the
course.
Midwest and I wouldn't mind living here, but if I get a job somewhere else, I would be happy to move there as
And
well.
how would you describe the Midwest, the experience we're talking? How would you describe that in terms of how you approach great works of art? You know what I'm trying to get at? Something about the character of you may understand works in a different way than the rest of us who live in bigger, busier, crazier cities.
And maybe, I'm not sure about that. I think because there is so much nature around, I've always loved going out and spending time just
Mm.
being quiet out in nature. And I think that's really what drew me to Dupont's music is that there's so much of a nature influence
Oh,
to them.
nice. We'll
Um,
talk about that. Yeah, tell
yeah,
me. Actually, let's talk now about it. There's something there. Is it maybe this nature thing? And how do you feel that there's a sort of nature connection with Dupont's music?
I mean, you look at most of the titles of his music are involving nature, whether it's the wind or the rain or
Yeah, yeah.
the sea is
Hmm.
obviously a huge part of the second suite, and even the songs too, the symbolist poetry that he set,
Mm.
all of this nature
I'm looking at
poetry.
from the sun to the garden. I mean, this idea is one of
Yeah.
the pieces in one of his suites. Uh, must have been a great comfort to him, and we'll talk about his,
Hmm.
the rough life he had at a certain point. Huh, very interesting. Well, that's why I kind of asked. Now, tell me a little bit about uh, this recording, because again, uh, no, I've been ambitious in my youth. I can say, but not am, but I'm always overwhelmed at the colossal project of putting together a CD that everybody
Hmm.
goes through. I would at a
Hmm.
certain point say, forget it. I'd rather just flap my hands. Forget. We don't need to have posterity. If it's going to just do this, that, and the other thing to me, tell me about the CD, because it sounds like a fairly quick project. Or did it take you several years? And how did you get the funding?
I mean, I think this is one of those instances where not knowing it, not knowing what the process was going to be like.
Naivete.
Yes, a little bit. So DuPont had kind of been it's been a long journey of learning about him. So I ended up taking a couple years off of school between the master's and doctorate. And so right before I took that time off, I had discovered his music. And so he was always in the back of my mind. I looked at the music, I was listening to it all the time. I was reading more and more about his life, started translating portions of his biography. And so he was just kind of always in the back of my mind. And then the University of Iowa just last school year, 2017, 2018, approved a new option where for your final doctoral project, you can make a sound recording. And so my advisor was like, this is perfect. Nobody knows about him. The music is incredible, and it's a great project. And so I had learned the two larger suites and gave a lecture recital on the shorter suite and did a full performance of the other one, and learned all of that over about 2 years, and then went into the recording studio and just kind of tried my best.
Are you kidding? So this is in fact your debut CD release, and
Yes.
we're talking 2 CD set, and we've been talking about these suites. Help me through my French, but Les Heures Dolentes, large suite, 14,
14 pieces.
beautiful pieces. Each of them we spoke of earlier could stand alone. They're so distinctive,
Yeah.
so fascinating. So perhaps maybe the confrontation of a 14-part suite might be why maybe he's not performed so much, but I guess I'm trying to say to everybody out there, hello pianists, a little, it doesn't matter at all. They're all very distinctive little vignettes, little stories, narratives on their own. Les Heures Dolentes is all of CD1. The second CD, La Maison dans les Dunes, which is fascinating, the house in the dunes, also 10 movements, all very descriptive, each very descriptive. Perfect for encore pieces or for a smaller suite, I think. And then these two earlier pieces that we'll talk about from his years. I don't want to sound too maudlin or morose, but this is before tuberculosis,
right?
When he was a student in the late 1890s. 12 Heures de Ballet, and remember he studied with Massenet.
Yes.
The great ballet composer, and again studied also. This is what dropped my jaw. This was really what caught my attention about these two French organist composers, Jean-Marie Widor and why don't I have the other guy?
Vierne.
Thank you, Vierne.
Yeah.
These are the men who wrote these gigantic symphonies for organ that are so incredible and descriptive, and that is, I think, the key to Dupont's. I don't want to. I mean, optimism would be one way of describing. Maybe there's some. In other words, he's facing trouble, and it's there, the dark side. But there's something. I don't know. What do you think? Tell me what you think about this composer that you have said is your special interest for now, at least.
Yeah, I don't know what it is that draws me so strongly to his music, but I knew as soon as I heard. So the way that I found his music was actually by accident. So my advisor had told me to look up obscure French composers because I played a lot of Debussy and really loved the atmospheric sound that you get from the French composers. And he said, well, look up the obscure ones because sometimes when their music is forgotten, it shouldn't be, because it's still good, but the war was so chaotic and people just got forgotten. And so he had told me of other composers that he had recorded, Zamazet.
Let's have the name of your advisor, because this is incredible insight.
Uriel Secor.
Go ahead, sorry.
Fabulous pianist, yeah. And so he had recorded a bunch of violin sonatas, and Zamazet was one of them. And so I looked up his piano music, thought, oh, that's interesting, but looked at the score and it was just crazy. Thought, I can't learn this. And then on YouTube, just by clicking links, all of a sudden La Maison dans les Dunes popped up. And it took me 5 seconds to know that this is the music that I want to learn. And then, of course, I listened to the rest of the suite. It was like, this is incredible music. And then I started looking up about his life, thought, what in the world? Nobody knows about him. This is what a tragic story, forgotten, and left such incredible music. But I don't know what it is. Maybe it's that connection of nature. There's metaphysical suffering, how we're all suffering in different ways. But
But
for him, there's
very
always
subtly, very subtly, actually not so subtly expressed, but not overwhelming. And
right.
there's
Yeah.
such an optimism. And I'm reading as I'm reading Les Heures de Londres while he's recovering from his first episode of tuberculosis, and later the
Yeah.
other suite, he's in a
It's
place for people
convalescing.
convalescing for people with
Hmm.
tuberculosis, which means
Hmm.
you are isolated. It's
Oh
very
yes, for
very
sure.
it's an extremely contagious disease. In other
Hmm.
words, there should be tons of loneliness, there should be tons of
Yeah.
despair, there should be all of that we of course also hear. That's why I used Schubert as just an example.
Hmm.
And it's there, but it is erased by, as you said, now that I think about it, I'm remembering the description of the valley, the beautiful valley and the sea in this place where he was convalescing.
Hmm.
Nature, in other words.
Hmm.
And also just the incredible tunefulness of this man. Whether we
Yeah.
think Massenet, and then sometimes the gigantic of the music, especially the second of the two big suites that's from a little later, I think, around 1910
Hmm.
or something.
Yeah.
That again, I'm thinking all those big organ symphonies or something. Go ahead, have I messed this all up on that idea?
Well, I mean, if you look at the score, that may be one reason why pianists don't tackle them because his music is so texturally complicated. I mean, it's so you can tell that there's a big organ influence, but also there's a really strong orchestral influence.
Interesting.
Um, yeah, there's just so many lines, counterlines, melody, pedal tones. It's
That has
it's
to
it's
be that has to be Vidor,
yeah.
those kind of teachers that he had.
Well, and even Franck to an extent.
Uh-huh.
There's a little bit of that as well.
But none of this D
Um,
minor stuff. I'm so tired of
well,
Franck and D minor. Everything is D minor. Ugh. Sorry, Monsieur. Sorry, César. There's none of it. By the way, there is none of that. That's the other thing. There is in Dupont's music. It's you know what I mean. It's up there. He's in an uplifting area of tonality.
yeah. Well,
Yeah.
and I think what is so fascinating about him is that he doesn't fit into a box as a composer. He's sort of a romantic, he's sort of an impressionist, he's sort of
Yeah.
both.
Yeah.
And so, like, obviously, there's comparisons to Debussy and Ravel because there's the water and the nature and the
Yeah.
color.
But there's not.
Um,
I mean, it's there somewhere, kind of, but
but
it's just kind of a minor influence in his own
right,
personality, if you
yeah.
will.
But then you look at the textures, it's like, okay, no, this texture is so thick, it's more like Franck. And then the cyclical form that he uses in both the suites, that's obviously a Frankian influence.
Sure.
But then on the other hand, he's not either, and he's something altogether. And I think that's because of the isolation. So obviously he was influenced by the other composers, but because he spent so much time alone, he really developed his own voice. And
Definitely.
as I've studied all of his music, I've really seen how he borrowed from himself quite a bit.
Ah.
And found ideas that he liked, and I thought, oh, that's interesting. He has that there and this
Ah.
there, and
Of
yeah.
course, I would not have noticed. I don't think. I don't. That doesn't. Is what I mean. This takes lots and lots of hearing, and so you are
Hmm.
essentially saying, if I understand this right, which is so interesting, that isolation. That's kind of why I asked you about Iowa. You know what I'm trying to say?
Mm.
Whether there's
Uh-huh.
something a simpatico thing that you sense somewhere deeply in this man's music, uh, uh, but also the idea that, sure enough, in isolation, he used a little snippet there, here and there, several times, apparently throughout these suites. I thought, well, that means I'm going to have to listen to these many, many more times. I can tell everyone out there who's watching, again, especially pianists, and there are lots of pianists and faculty pianists and college
Mm.
professors. Uh, Look into this man's music. It's gorgeous. I mean, just bottom line,
Hmm.
flat out gorgeous, and then there are the sub basements and so on, but not just magnificent. Well, where do you want to go from here? Should we look at maybe two or three of the examples, for example?
Sure.
Okay. By the way, let me just do a little quote. I try so hard to be so artsy from Henri de Régnier.
Uh-huh.
I'm going to say it in English because, of course, I'd really wreck it
Okay.
if I tried it in French. The low, and to me, but what I'm trying to, the reason this quote is found, it's on your program, beautiful program notes, by the way, on the two
Thank you.
CD set. But this, I think, expresses this man, quote from Henri de Régnier, the low and melancholy voice of someone who is no longer there, but who remembers the monstrous and dreary country from which he comes. And to me, that is a kind of epiphany about the war that was to come, maybe
Interesting.
even a kind of prescience. I think he mentioned, I don't have that particular quote, I read, didn't I, in the program notes, that on his deathbed even, he knew. Speak to that, would you? I mean,
Yeah. And so as he was in 1914, that's when his last opera was supposed to premiere in the fall. And as we know, that was when things were getting really bad. But throughout the summer, he had different meetings with his friend, the pianist Maurice Dumesnil, who performed all the works and has written a great article about him, one of the only primary sources that we have. And so he said, I just want to hear this opera performed before I pass away, and kept saying, oh, they're going to get it together in some way and peace is going to be preserved. How could something like this happen? And then as he is on his final night, it's the day that France mobilized for World War I, and his last breath, he's crying out saying, do you hear the guns are passing by? War is here. And then died. What a dramatic death.
and also what an act of prescience.
Yeah.
And so I'm going to let you go here a little bit, because at what I'm kind of getting at, which is, okay, we've established a certain prescience. He felt things that might. So he clearly knew the end result of his long time problem with tuberculosis. By the way, my grandfather was a pharmacist at the turn of, but this was quite common, late 19th century, early 20th century. Tuberculosis was quite common, really. But even my grandfather was affected by by this plague on humankind, tuberculosis. He was very fussy. You had to wear shoes. Don't walk on the sidewalks barefoot. You might pick up, on and on and on. He had a special way of drinking out of a glass at a restaurant so that he could.
Wow.
But it affected humans that profoundly, just like cholera and other horrible diseases that wiped out so many people. But so this prescience. Talk to me a little bit about where you hear it. For example, of course, the epigraph. In the first suite, Les Heures Dolentes, the sorrowful hours, holy woe, 1903, 1905. Talk to me about that piece and maybe epigraph and other movements.
Yeah, so when he was writing Les Heures Dolentes, he was so ill that they thought that he was going to die. And so there's one there's a memory from Dumesnil who says he crossed paths with, I think it was Widor, and said, don't go up because he's going to die at any moment. And so he had been pretty ill, and so he was in his isolation. And so in epigraph, there's two themes in it. It's a short piece. It's got sort of this fate theme that I've called it,
dirge,
and then
that opening dirge tune, if you will. And yet, this is what's so special about him. And yet, after the dirge.
And then there is this beautiful lyrical theme that, and both of those themes come back in and out throughout the suite so many different times. Sometimes kind of surprisingly, sometimes transformed where it's almost unrecognizable, but come back very frequently. And then so you hear it throughout other pieces. There's the melancholy of the wind, or of the song of the rain, of the bells tolling on Sunday afternoon. And then you get to track number 11, which is one of my favorites, Death is Lurking. It's just such an amazing piece, very colorful. You got these bells tolling. You have this really siren song almost of death trying to draw Dupont to him. And then all of a sudden there's this huge outburst, and then death backs off, and then and it goes back and forth between the two. Then this theme comes back from epigraph, and it's just so beautiful, but then it goes back, and then death just wanders off to the distance, and Dupont is spared just for another day.
And this is the period 1903, 1905. He lives to 1914. Talk about prescience expressed in music. This fighting off in the 11th little piece. I particularly loved, in terms of imagery, and I want you to speak about his compositional imagery. The evening falls in the room, le soir tombe dans la chambre. Can you remember? Give me a little something about that. I've got some notes here. There's an underbelly of sadness and resignation.
Yeah.
But there's still this heroic optimism.
Yeah, it starts with this. You can just kind of imagine him just sitting in his chair or lying on his bed or something, and it's getting dark out, and it's just that quiet hour at evening, and he starts drifting off, maybe dreaming about nature, dreaming about what his life could have been, and then this melancholy theme comes in, and then you hear like bells tolling, but then it's back to the really dreamy aspect. It's so simple, and I think it's kind of a nice mirroring, because that's the second piece in the suite, and then the second to the last piece is the Hallucinations, which is another nighttime piece.
Wow!
And then
I can re-listen. Oh boy!
Yeah. So Sleepless Night.
Because I think I thought you were about to speak to a certain mirroring, even in that suite that the piece we were speaking of.
Oh, that piece, yeah.
Even I don't know, but what I have in my notes is somehow there's a trend. There's darkness is ever present, but somehow transcended by beauty. That's the thing that blew me away about his music. Such gorgeous music and a kind of innocence.
Yes,
you got to be kind of innocent to fight the devil off. To fight death.
Absolutely. And so he was so skilled at writing music that could capture so many different emotions, from the terrifying of the Hallucinations to, if you think about his operas, which are also incredible, his last opera especially, where the character is dying, but he plants himself up with his spear on his horse so that his enemies see him still standing up even in his death.
Oh my
and then the
God,
opera
just
ends completely soft, and it's just over as the sun comes up. It's just that's one of the things that I appreciated, is that, okay, so life has all of this craziness in it, and then both of the suites at the end, they just end so peaceful and so quietly, and it's just incredible, especially performing them, but I even think listening to them. I mean, it's a lot of work to perform the suites.
Yeah.
And then you get to the end, and it's just like, it's so satisfying. It doesn't leave you in that turmoil or in that pain, but it just kind of has that beautiful simplicity.
I'm not smiling, but it reminds me of my experience for many years in Seattle of the Ring Cycle, which is that Wagner destroys you over 4 nights. But Götterdämmerung, at the very end of Götterdämmerung, you are lifted out of the room on a cloud of ether and something, ecstasy. Same thing. Let's talk about La Maison dans les Dunes, a house in the dunes. And we've now skipped ahead a few years, from 1903, 1905 to 1908, 1909, roughly. But this is when he was alone, quite alone in this little sort of tuberculosis colony, because they had to be isolated. I thought it was an island, but I guess it was just sort of a valley on the continent, with the sea.
Yeah, it's a basin on the Arcachon Basin. It's very famous, very popular with tourists because it's so beautiful. So you have of course you have the sea, you have these beautiful dunes, and you have these pine forests. And so they thought that the salt in the sea air and the sand was good for the lungs, and so it was really popular for people who were convalescing.
Kind of like going to the desert in the U.S. Somehow the dry desert was thought to be, and may have been, good for tuberculosis sufferers. You want to choose one? I'm thinking of Sails on the Water.
Okay.
Tell me a little bit about Sails on the Water. And the reason I think that is I'm always thinking of, I always go blank, the Grapes of Wrath, Walt Whitman, and when he says, "Behold the sea," in Ray Vaughan Williams' Sea Symphony, it must have been glorious in the late 19th century. The sails on the water.
And you think, so you can just imagine him. I mean, I think the first 6 pieces in the suite are sort of like what he would see walking along the dunes. So the sights, the sounds, everything, the memories.
La Maison du Souvenir, that's the House of Memories.
One of my favorites. Right? Yep. And so, yeah, it's an interesting piece. So that one it begins with just sort of this the bobbing of the boats on the waves, just kind of this repetitive building, and then you have gusts of wind that go, and then the boats are bobbing, and then the boats get a little bit more intense, and then the waves are getting a little bit bigger, and then it has this big dramatic buildup where you can just imagine these waves and the people struggling on their sailboats trying to stay afloat. And then it goes into this recitative, which is actually, I found the recitative in a secondary printing or a primary printing. I'm not sure. There's two different versions of the score. There's one on IMSLP, which most of the pianists use. It's the most readily available. And then just trying to get my hands on physical copies, I got a scan of this other printing from the French National Library and saw, okay, it has different dynamic markings, but in Voile sur l'eau, it actually had like a 13 or 20 measure recitative section.
Who put in
Which
those markings? He or someone else? Do you know?
I don't know.
But they're quite different in many ways, yeah? In those senses.
Yeah, the dynamics. I believe that
Very interesting.
he would have made the changes because it mostly was tempo changes, dynamic changes. But that was the most surprising, was finding this recitative, and I put it back in because I think it helps make the piece more cohesive, because it starts off with this kind of ominous, what is this call? And then that is referred back to in the recitative section.
And what I find also is I loved it so much. It's such a wonderful, wonderful piece. And as I'm thinking of him, his illness, he understands perfectly
Hmm.
well the fragility of the human body somehow. I mean,
Hmm.
you know what I mean? Those dark, those threatening moments you described. He knows very well the sea is dangerous. I mean, it's like
Right,
you
yeah.
can die here. And
Hmm.
I know because I'm going through a process, as what I imagined. Just incredible. And La Maison du Souvenir, this
Hmm.
lovely, overpowering memory at work. Something, and again, we've mentioned already, calm. There's something
Hmm.
always calming. Uh, man, oh man, oh man. But we've already shot through 32 minutes. What I want to look at is and ask you now. You also chose two. Forgive me, it's not quite because he was extraordinary, but let's say student works. Can I sort of
Yes.
safe there? Uh,
Yeah. Hmm.
Magnificent, stunning student works, homage to Bach in many, at least
Hmm.
two of them.
Hmm.
Uh, why did you put them at the end as a reflective thing, or is there any, or did you just throw them at a dartboard, and why those? And I know certainly, I mean de ballet. Massenet. I mean, he studied with Massenet, for crying out loud. From
Hmm.
1895. Let's just start there. The Pavane and the aria. So incredible, interesting.
Yeah, I was so glad when I finally got the scans. Again, I got the scans from the French National Library of both of the earlier pieces. They I think because they I kept on bothering them, they finally put them on IMSLP as well. So they're now available for free on
Wonderful.
IMSLP, which is great, thanks to me. But
Like naming an
I
asteroid after you. Yeah.
I just thought that they like for it it's hard to say because on one hand it seems like a different composer because he was, I think, 17 or 18, and then
Anyway,
19 or 20, somewhere
something like
around
that.
there
Yeah.
when he
Late
wrote
teens,
those
early
two.
20s. Yeah.
Yeah,
Student for sure.
so definitely a student.
But
And
what a
so
master of the assignment. You know what I mean?
yeah, and so after having studied the more complex work, I could see, oh, okay, so even from the beginning, he was starting to have his own voice. So doing a making a statement, but then stating it again in a different key that's not really related, or it's in
Yeah,
sort of a
very interesting.
weird key relationship. And the way that the harmony changes, that they're very tuneful as well, which is a little bit unusual for composers of the time. Um,
Inventive and intelligence. I mean, this shows that these student pieces know this incredibly inventive intellect. He knew
mhm.
what he was doing, and he took, as you just described. For example, the little Picardy chord at the end of the Pavane. So I don't know, kind of coy and interesting and unique and inventive.
Yeah. Yeah.
What about now? Here's where I'm really in trouble because I can never pronounce Foyet d'Album.
Foyer.
Foyer
Yeah.
slapped me. Foyer
Foyer
d'Album
d'album.
from
Yeah.
1897, and
Uh-huh.
these pieces, the Fouguet, the Berceuse, and
Uh-huh.
Danser, dedicated
Mm-hmm.
to Louis Vierne.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Kepl, for finally getting the pronunciation right and the name right. Actually four lovely pieces.
Yeah.
Student works, but give me an
Mm-hmm.
overview of these. So much
Yeah.
fun, really very fun.
Yes. Yeah, so they are immediately a little bit more complicated. The first two, the Pavan and the Aria, very simple, right? Just sort of
But
walking bass
brilliantly
in the
put
left hand.
together. But
Yeah, and
brilliantly.
then the Foyer, they get a little bit more complicated texturally, rhythmically, harmonically. You start seeing, okay, he's starting to get a little bit more adventurous. The lilting of the waltz. And then the Fuguet, he loved Bach, and he was an organist at the beginning, and so you can definitely hear the influence of Bach there. And then you get this Berceuse, which all of a sudden is just it's gorgeous. I mean, I think it foreshadows La Maison du Souvenir, same key, D flat major, um,
Hmm.
very romantic, just
And I'm seeing in
really
my notes mostly for its maturity for such a young man.
yeah.
That particular movement, the Berceuse,
Yeah.
really
And then
takes the
the
breath away. That's what I mean. This was such a discovery for me. Thank you very, very
mhm.
much, this man's music. Excuse me, go ahead.
And then you get the Minuet, which is very stately and strong, and then has this trio in it. The Minuet's in G minor, the trio's in E minor. It's like, well, that's interesting.
Mm.
Um, but as far as placement, so I originally was only planning on recording the two suites, the two larger suites, because that was a big project in and of itself.
And then you said, oh, I
And
got two
then my
CDs.
committee said, you're already way over the limit for one CD, so you might as well just record the other two. And I
Nice.
struggled with the placement, honestly, of where to put them because my favorite suite is the second one, La Maison dans les Dunes. That's how I got to know his music. I learned it first. That's my favorite, and so I really wanted that to be prominent on the second disc. Um, and so then I thought, well, where else am I supposed to put this? So I ending with the minuet, it ends strong. So I thought, okay, that'll be a good ending to end the second CD with.
But oh, that's so mercenary. But the gift that you gave us was a peek at the brilliant young student before the Troubles.
Hmm.
And really, now that I kind of think about it, I understand you completely. The two suites are so huge, so important,
Hmm.
uh, uh, and so worthy all by themselves.
Hmm.
But I'm really grateful to you for giving us this peek into the student days. You get a very clear idea of how brilliant he was,
Hmm.
how vivacious, if you will, in terms of his intellect and his experimentation and all of that. And then to see it mature, as of course any serious illness, and it wasn't long, 1897, 1903, by 1903 he was
Right.
at it,
Yeah. Mm.
There's not a lot of happiness before the bad times,
Yeah.
and he's still so young.
Hmm.
But still so, again, because of his youth, let's say, perhaps in the first suite, so determined,
Hmm.
to pull through. And then, and also in the period 1908, 1909, still, what about, still this wonderful optimistic defiance of his difficulties, I think is wonderful throughout the two CD set. Can you
Hmm.
give me a little, now that you mention it, what's that period from, let's say, 1910 to 1914? What happened, or did he become kind of debilitated? But you said that his opera was debuted in
Yeah.
1914,
Yeah.
so.
So towards the end of his life, he thought that he was best suited for composing works for the stage. And so I think in 1908 was his second opera, and then he had a comic opera in there as well, and then his final epic. opera Antar at the end. He also wrote a piano quintet in 1910, 1911, which is it's also incredible.
So the
Massive
output
work.
is not very large, really, because of the big projects, the operas, in terms of chamber music and any symphonies. I mean, I didn't really see
Uh,
any mention.
One orchestral tone poem, Le Chant
Figures.
de la Destinée, which there just was a recording of his orchestral works released, I think in February. And so he had one orchestral, it's three pieces from his student days again, called Summer Day, and then the Song of the Destined. Um, Four operas, the 30 piano pieces, 30 songs.
Okay, so a pretty good output. I
Um,
didn't realize I didn't even touch on the songs, so
yeah.
pretty decent. Yeah.
Considering he composed most of it in just 10 years, between
Of course.
1904 to 1914,
And again, the
it's
tragedy of
significant.
of these brilliant composers who died too soon. Well, I think. By the way, the opera's produced often or not? Probably not, but
I
once in a
wish
while.
that I wish they were produced more. Antar, I think, was restaged in 2015.
In Europe, of course, not in America.
Yeah.
Yeah, in
Hmm.
France, presumably, a smaller
I believe
company,
so.
something
Yeah.
like that. Yeah.
Hmm.
You
Yeah.
you've made me very, very curious. I guess we'd better cut it off, or people are gonna, come making fun of us.
Okay.
I've been having a great talk with pianist Bo Teese in Iowa City, Iowa. His two CD set, the complete piano music of French composer Gabriel Dupont, 1878, 1914. It's just this is an MSR Classics release from 2018. Absolutely beautiful. By the way, the recording quality. Where'd you? I didn't go quite catch where was the recording made?
Yeah, it
What
was in
section?
the University of Iowa's concert hall, which is
Ah,
the building is only a couple years old, and so the acoustics are state of the art,
gorgeous.
really incredible.
Gorgeous, and the instrument sounds fabulous. Everything
Hmm.
about this recording is great, and for all pianists, this is really a survey. We know that other recordings have been made. You and I discussed that,
Hmm.
but this is obviously the most recent, anyway, of the complete piano works. And what a major and important figure that we need to rediscover. And we've already mentioned that World War One came. He dies right at the verge of chaos and
Hmm.
becomes really kind of lost in the tides of history, as so many others. And the beauty of CDs and recordings and new age and young, if I may say so from my old man's vantage, young scholars who are really looking at hard at this repertoire that is not so often performed. Just a magnificent service, I think, for pianists and for this composer. Bo, what have I forgotten? Anything? What's going on next? I mean, aside from job hunting. Let's talk. What's up?
Well, I recorded his songs over
Ah,
the winter, and so that should be released either the end of this year or beginning of next year.
with whom?
Um,
I mean, I presume
Rachel
songs.
Josselson,
And she's
she's a
a soprano.
soprano
Yeah.
at the University of Iowa.
Perfect.
Yeah, and then I just started kind of undertaking a transcription project of Dupont, of looking at his operas. It's a very selfish project, but looking at his operas and arranging them for solo piano. So
You know what? It's not a selfish project. I have no idea yet. But what I'm saying is, you're going to resurrect them.
I hope
You're
so, yeah.
transcribing them for piano. Have I got this right?
Hmm.
Yeah.
Hmm.
So what you're saying to me, anyway, and I have no idea whether I'm anywhere hot or cold, but what my big takeaway? Gorgeous, gorgeous melody.
Hmm.
This
Yeah.
man was a master of melody, and to think that this. By the way, the Antar was wildly successful, as I remember
Yeah,
reading.
yes.
So there have to be fabulous tunes in there that you're going to help us rediscover. Yeah.
Hmm.
Fabulous. Bo, many thanks. I know it's late. It's got to be going 10:30, 11 or something. Is that sunrise or is that must be the
No,
ceiling light?
that's
Uh,
my ceiling light.
anyway, great pleasure. Lots. Very, very interesting talking to you. And congratulations on this fabulous project. I'll put up the interview, as everybody knows, and I promise, write a review. And that's the hard part for me, and I'm so far behind. But at performingartsreview.net, and every time you keep me posted, because every time something big comes on, keep me posted. I'll throw it up on your page at performingartsreview.net. But also, if you use Facebook, in fact, your site is a Facebook site. Yeah, pretty much your
Hmm.
principal
Yeah.
site is a Facebook site. I think we're friends. I don't know yet, but that's such a powerful social. It really is powerful social networking, and I've always poo-pooed Facebook, and I'm not happy with what's his face. There's a lot to be unhappy with, but it's a tremendous tool. And when you put something
Hmm.
up on Facebook, I will share it with all of my
Okay.
people. Okay. All right. So
All
it's a
right.
deal.
Thank you very much.
Many thanks. See you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.